So, firstly, how aware are you of the issues surrounding traumatic brain injuries within ice hockey?
Well, I am aware they exist, so I'm not going to pretend that they don't. But so yeah, I'm fully aware they've always existed. It's not something you can hide from. Now they exist in all sports. So yeah, 100% they are there.
Have you witnessed or been around a time when one of these instances has occurred, or there's been a time where maybe someone's been at risk of a brain injury or head injury?
Yeah, I've seen people get knocked out. Not common, I think, is important to note. I mean, most recently, someone I used to play with has just taken the rest of the season off because I think he's had 5 head injuries in the last 6 months. But in my experience, that's very, very uncommon. I can't say I was around a lot of head injuries. But then I played at probably slightly a different time to where we're at now. The changes of rules and things have kind of, if anything, heightened head injuries rather than taken them away. So I would say it was probably less prevalent when I was playing than it is now.
And you mentioned then those rules that have changed should probably increase the chances of head injuries. Why is that? Surely those rules would look to lessen the extent of them.
See, this is a very difficult subject for some people. So, to try and combat head injuries, they've removed fighting from ice hockey, which is not the cause of most head injuries. I think what's happened is there's been several players who've committed suicide that used to primarily fight. I'm not saying that fighting hasn't contributed to their CTE or whatever it is they were diagnosed with afterwards. But in most of those cases, there were also addictions to pain medications. And I think rather than looking at the bigger picture, everyone's just gone, fighting caused it. But you take fighting out of ice hockey and it stops self-policing itself. So things that you wouldn't be able to get away with years ago, so hitting somebody in the head, taking cheap shots, you wouldn't do because you knew you would have to then stand up and take on somebody who was usually a lot bigger than you and a lot scarier than you. So by removing that aspect from the game, there are no consequences. With the greatest of respect, taking a penalty or being fined, I don't know, if you're playing in the NHL and you earn millions a year, taking $1,000 fine it's nothing. So it's not really a consequence to what's going on. So I think removing that from the game has actually had an adverse effect rather than what they were trying to achieve, which was to stop it. It's actually made it worse. I think it's Dr. Victoria Silverwood I've spoken to a couple of times, who's done the Ice Guardians documentary. If you speak to her, she confirms again there's no real statistics because ice hockey, especially in this country, don't really keep any. But there is evidence to suggest that actually removing fighting has caused a bigger problem rather than solved it.
And with regards to the media coverage, with the research that's out there seems to be sort of mixed views in terms of the coverage, whether or not it has a positive or negative effect on the issue of surrounding traumatic brain injuries within ice hockey. But either way, it does have a large part to play in terms of raising awareness and the public perception of TBIs in ice hockey. Do you feel that the current coverage of that there is now TBIs is having a positive or negative effect on the sport?
I don't think the levels of coverage the sport receives, I don't think it has an effect one way or another, if that makes sense. I think the sport, especially here, is a minority sport, so media coverage is pretty much... I mean, if you go on, I don't know, we're in Wales, go on Wales Online and try and find a Devils match report, you probably severely struggle to find anything at all because it's just not a sport that's covered. So I suppose nuances like injuries within the sport are something that's definitely not covered over here. So I think it's more a lack of coverage. It's not something that's not happening. It's not something people are not reporting on for any particular reason. I just think it doesn't fill column inches and people are not interested in reading it, so it's not something that gets put out there.
Do you feel, though, then, as is, of course, not as popular here in the UK, that needs to be addressed? In terms of TBIs?
Yeah, I mean, you have to address it because obviously it's a problem. I mean, as somebody who's played, I was well aware of, whatever sport you play, you put yourself in physical danger to a certain degree, and I was well aware of the things that I was going through, and I think now we have that information. You can't keep it covered up. You know, it's not something you pretend that doesn't exist, and the information should be available for people. But over here, you're never going to get media coverage of it. Even if you go over to America, like in Canada, okay, it's a national sport, so it's kind of 24/7 ice hockey. But then even if you cross the border and you go into the USA, where the NHL is a big deal, I mean, American football takes precedent, baseball takes precedent, basketball takes precedent. They've now started the XFL, which again takes precedent. So even over there, it's the fifth sport in line to be reported on. So media coverage is just never has been a massive part of the game. And I don't think you're ever going to get people to make it that way unless it's, you know, a scandal. I mean, when players started suing the NHL because of head injuries, that was quite widely reported. Not because of the head injuries, but because somebody was being sued, and, you know, it was more of a public angle in that sort of sense. But I don't think you're ever going to get mass coverage of it.
And looking at some statistics, I mean, particularly in the US, it says ice hockey causes 44% of all head injuries to kids within Canada, and concussion makes up between 15 to 30% of all ice hockey head injuries in general. Those numbers are continually increasing. So even though they seem low now, they may increase to more than over 50% in a few years. How important is it that we address that issue surrounding traumatic brain injuries in ice hockey?
It is important, but I think statistics can always be not so much subjective. But I mean, if you look at them, I mean, all right, so 44% in Canada. Now, ice hockey is predominantly the main sport played in Canada, so quite naturally it probably does, make up 44% of head injuries, because there's not a lot of American football played there. So, okay. But I think, I mean, obviously concussion can be caused by, we call it a head injury, but I think something I read the other day regarding rugby was the majority of concussions are not actually caused from blows to the head. They're caused from just big general collisions within your body and your head snapping. So, I mean, it's difficult, isn't it, really? I think, obviously, statistically, maybe it is. More should be done to combat it, and I think they are. But I think, like I said to you earlier, they're going in the wrong direction, if that makes sense. I think it's kind of all being labelled around fighting, which is, especially when you say kids, there's not a lot of fighting that goes on within kids' ice hockey. So, but then again, you're always probably going to have that at a lower level as well, because like any sport, you know, as you play rugby growing up, you don't learn to tackle perfectly straight away. So things go wrong, and that's probably always going to happen. So yeah, things do need to be done, but I don't think it's as big an issue maybe as we make of it sometimes.
And we mentioned then the media coverage as well, their lack of. But how can media coverage help raise awareness of such issues?
I think by being positive and making, what's the word, sort of sensible decisions in the way things are reported. I think a lot of the times when we do report on things like this, as somebody that writes myself, I think fear-mongering is quite a common thing. We immediately rush and go, oh my God, 50% of kids in Canada are suffering from head injuries from ice hockey, and that's, although statistically true, like, you can write that in a way that still, you know, doesn't discourage people from taking part in sport, but provides that information that they need to kind of make a, you know, an informed decision on whether they continue down that road. So I think, media coverage does play a big role, but I think it has a responsibility as well to report sort of, you know, in the right way, and not put things across, you know, just in a, oh my God, don't play sport anymore, we're all going to die of head injuries kind of way. And
finally, if you had to change the way that we as sports journalists cover ice hockey and help the coverage of TBIs, what recommendations would you make to change that in a positive way, or maybe a negative way?
I mean, it's different. I think we all have access to the internet now. We all have social media. So everyone is very aware of these things, but maybe not always the most informed, if that makes sense. It's quite easy to Google something and find. But then for every article I can find saying that head injuries are bad and prevalent within the game, I could probably find you the same amount that say they're not, because that's the way things are these days. So I think from a sports journalist point of view, same way I would write when I'm covering football or whatever, is to be truthful, to be accurate, and to try and keep things as positive as you can. I mean, I think the worst thing we can do with any sport is to discourage people from playing. You know, we all realise we're at risk. I realised I was at risk when I played the game. I never ever went out and thought that I was going to make it through without getting injured. Of course you're going to at some point. You know, that's just a fact of life. You could not play sport and you could still fall down the stairs and end up with a concussion. So, you know, I think we have a responsibility from a journalism standpoint to make sure that what we're reporting is done in a, not necessarily always a positive life, because sometimes things are not positive, but, you know, just to be responsible with the way we put things across and not to just put fear into people for the sake of it, really.
Great, thank you very much.